Alright guys, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be fixing my horn. The previous owner installed, this steering wheel here, but he couldn't get the horn to work. So, and I've also noticed that the turn signals have been pretty intermittent. So, but in addition to that, while we have the steering wheel disconnected and uninstalled, we're going to be replacing it with this style steering wheel here. It's a little bit different. Obviously it's black versus the wood grain, but it's also a 14-inch wheel. So the original, or not the original, but the one that's existing is 15-inch. So wanted something a little bit smaller. The 15-inch just seemed a little big for this car, so wanted something just a little bit smaller. Plus I wanted to get a black one. The wood grain is very nice. I just preferred the black wood grain finish here. So, but the biggest thing is what we're going to do is replace the harness that's within the steering column that also has the functions here for the horn. It also controls the turn signal too. So what we're going to do is basically remove the steering wheel, take the harness out, and then repin all the connections underneath the dash. So first things first, when doing this project here, make sure you disconnect the battery. First thing that we're going to do after disconnecting the battery is go ahead and take off this little cover here on the horn. Set that aside, and then what we're going to notice here is there's these two little wires connected to the horn mechanism. We're just going to go ahead and simply disconnect that. There's also this little spring that we're going to remove. Go ahead and hold on to this because we might need this later on. And then there's 3 bolts here, and then a larger nut right here holding the actual steering wheel in place. So let's go ahead and remove all that. So in order to remove these 3 existing bolts, we're going to use a 7/16 socket. One thing to keep in mind is make sure before you remove the steering wheel that it's basically as straight as possible. That way when everything goes back into place, it's all, back to normal and straight and everything. So you don't want your steering wheel a little cockeyed when driving straight. So, all right, next up we're going to remove this nut here, and we're going to use a 15/16 socket to remove this. Let's go ahead and do that. Now we got the steering wheel off. Now this little retainer cap is going to come off. All right, guys, so in order to remove this piece right here, you actually need a steering wheel puller. I don't actually have one, so what I did is something interesting. I ended up finding 1/4-inch bolts that were long enough, one, to fit these existing holes here, but long enough to be able to reuse this cap. And basically what I did was put the cap backwards, feed these bolts into the existing holes in that piece that we need to remove, bolted that in, not all the way, just enough to get it started. and then took a pry bar tool and put it in between that little steering shaft and this cap. So basically it looked like that. And then so what it ended up doing is just slowly cranking down these bolts down, one at a time, just kept rotating it around slowly until that retainer popped out. So it's basically just a homemade version of the steering wheel removal tool. So it worked for me. It popped out pretty quickly. So happy I didn't actually have to go buy a steering wheel removal tool. But I got it out. So now this thing just slides right off. Again, it popped out after my homemade tool there. So if we look a little bit closer, this little piece here, basically on the new one, are these little spring-loaded pins that essentially connect or finish the circuit of the horn. So these are the things that depress down to activate the horn. And then so the existing one that I have here is bent and also looks a little fried, quite honestly. So I believe that's the issue that having here with the horn. So let's go ahead and finish removing all this. I'm going to go ahead and remove the little turn signal shaft here, and all you do is basically unscrew it at a steering wheel column. And we'll set that aside because we'll obviously need that again. Next up, there's this larger spring that we need to take out, and again, we'll go ahead and save that. And now what we have are there's 3 screws here that we'll need to remove. We'll set those 3 screws aside. One thing that we're also going to remove and set aside is this little basically retainer here. We're going to need to reuse this to basically hold our new turn signal and horn wiring harness back in place. So make sure we keep that aside as well, along with those 3 screws we just took out. Okay, after that you should be able just to pull this out a little bit, and basically what we're going to do is that's all the parts that we really need to maintain and keep. But what we want to be able to do is actually we have to pull this whole harness through the steering column here, but what I want to do is actually cut the wires on this end and then pull down from the bottom of the shaft. Since we have to repin the existing connector to this new harness, we're going to use we want as much wire as possible to be able to help us guide us back to putting the new wires in the new connector. So that's another good reason why you want to leave as much wire as possible. So full transparency, guys, I actually had a hard time running the new harness down the steering column. I actually made it much harder for myself than it really is. This is actually pretty easy to do. So basically we're going to start over. I already have the old harness pulled out of the column, and we're going to go ahead and start over and put the new harness back down the correct way. So the easiest way to do this is to remove these 2 little screws. There's a small screw here and a small screw right here. What I did wrong was to take these 2 nuts out. Now, do not take these 2 nuts out, because what that does is separate this outer ring from the rest of the column. But what we want to do is separate the back side of this this hub here from the column. So, and that by doing that, all you have to do is remove these two little screws. So let's go ahead and do that. As you can see, that back little collar here kind of just slides back down the steering column. And now what we're going to do is feed the wires through this larger opening here and then pull it through and show you real quick what that looks like. But one thing I want to point out is make sure that you're careful with these little connectors here, because there's like a little pin on the side of each little connector that holds this whole wire in place of the connector that you're going to actually attach it to. So these things are pretty fragile. I've already messed up one of them and had to redo that. So again, make sure you're careful with this. So what we're going to do is just feed these wires through this large opening right here, and then we'll feed it down the rest of the steering column. All right, once we got that through the wires down through the large opening, we're going to go ahead and put this cam in place. Now this section here goes through this hole, and there's another hole on the back side that this little piece fits into. And then we're going to grab this little retainer ring that we took off earlier and go ahead and slide it in place, and then attach the three screws that hold this whole thing in place. Okay, after you put those three screws in, this larger spring that we took out earlier, that just basically slides right over. All right, there. So since we removed the back part of this collar here by removing those two little screws, what that opens up is being able to access the area that we're going to feed the wires down the steering column. So we already put the wires through that first opening. The second part is now to feed it down this opening down here that this back collar was covering. So what we're going to do is just take the wires and start feeding it down. Again, by trying to make sure we're careful with not damaging those pins. See, now all of them start feeding down pretty easily down the column here, and they're going to come out at the bottom here in a second. All right, the wires are starting to appear down here at the column, so we're going to go ahead and just start grabbing them and continue to push it through from the top to make it a little bit easier. Now this section of the collar that we loosened up earlier feeds over the wiring harness. Now, while we see it now, you can just screw that back in place. All right, now that we have the wires fed through, we're going to go ahead and screw this back section of this collar back on with those two little screws. All right, and that's it for this top half here. So what we're going to do now is go ahead and repin everything down below, connect everything, and then we're going to finish off by attaching the new steering wheel. Okay, so now we're under the dash to make the connections down below. Earlier we pulled the whole old harness out and basically kept everything intact. That way, we would remove one wire at a time to connect back to the existing connectors here to complete the harness. So one thing that I highly recommend is picking up one of these depinning tools here to make it easy to remove these pins from the existing connector, and that way you don't damage these little pins that we talked about earlier. So, and it's pretty easy. All you do is just slide the depinning tool over the existing pin, just push it through, and then the wire on the back side comes right out. So just like that. So what we're going to do is do one wire at a time, connect the new harness to the original connector here, and make the final connection to the factory harness. And you'll hear it click when you know it's engaged into the connector. Yeah, and then you just tug on it a little bit, and if it doesn't slide out, then you're good. One thing I highly suggest doing too is go ahead and take a picture of this connector. That way you know where all the wires really go and which pin they actually go to. That way, if you accidentally pull something out, you don't remember where it is, then you at least have the picture to reference. Okay, once you have all the wires pinned back into the connectors here, just go ahead and pull on each wire slightly just to make sure everything's engaged properly. Then after that, we're going to go ahead and feed this harness over the emergency brake. That way it's a little bit out of the way and not dangling below. And then go ahead and connect it back to the existing harness by matching up. There's two little lines here, or not two, one on each connector. You just match those lines up and then click the connectors together. And that's it. One thing that I highly recommend doing, and I'll do this a little bit later, is by cleaning this up, is go ahead and put some electrical tape over these wires so it looks a little bit neater. I personally like some Tessa tape, which is more of a electrical tape, but it actually has a fabric material on it, as you can see on this harness here, and it just in my opinion is easier to use. So highly recommend that. But that's it for below the dash here. Now what we're going to do is get back up and get the steering wheel on. All right, now let's go ahead and put the new steering wheel on. But first off, I'm going to go ahead and put the turn signal arm back in. And it basically just threads back into the side here. All right, now we're going to put the new hub on. Now, one thing to make sure is that the kit comes with these two little pins. So you want to make sure that those two pins are installed. Basically, what those are for is to make sure that the turn signal cam goes back into its original position, after you've made the turn. So, and then the other thing to point out is that there's a little hole or dimple here at the top of the hub. Basically, that's an indicator to let you know that to put this on correctly. So that little dimple faces straight up. So we're just going to slide the hub back down onto the steering column. Also, one thing to note is that there's this little escutcheon plate, I'll call it, that sits on here to close up the gap between the existing steering column and the new hub. So make sure that you have that in place before you put this on. This kit comes with two styles. So there's this one, and then there's this one here that I prefer. So I'm going to go ahead and have that ready and slide this new hub onto the steering column. And then grab the bolt that you removed earlier from the old steering wheel. I actually went ahead and bought a brand new one because my old one was all chewed up. So went ahead and bought a new one. Go ahead and install that. Then with a 5/16 socket, I'm going to go ahead and screw this nut back down to hold the hub in place. All right, after you got that hub secure, I'm going to go ahead and finish off the little finish ring here. And there's some small set screws on the side here that you want to adjust. That way that collar sits flush against the existing steering wheel column. All right, now we're going to go ahead and attach the little horn button. And basically you just connect these two wires that were attached to the hub and then connect it to the back side of the horn button. And it doesn't matter which one you connect them to. All it does is complete the circuit. So all you do is just push this in place. There's a little rubber gasket here that helps hold it inside this hub. Just like that. Next, I'm going to take my new steering wheel and then just slide it over the hub, and then take your new ring here and just fit it over and align the holes up and install all the screws. Okay guys, one thing to point out is that you don't want to over tighten these little screws here because they're very soft and you'll easily strip the head. So I've already done that, so just letting you guys know. Luckily I had an extra one to replace it with, so but again, don't over tighten them. I also suggest going in a little star pattern here to tighten these down. And to finish this off, we've got a little emblem here that we're going to stick in the center. There you go, guys. Man, that looks really good. Oh, I definitely like the 14-inch steering wheel here. Just gives it more of a sportier feel. The other one was just 15 inches was just a little too big. So I really like this a lot. Plus, gives you a little bit more room underneath your leg. So obviously, the last thing to do is test it out, see if it all works. So let's go ahead and do that. Get it started up. All right, time to give the horn and turn signal a test. Go ahead and just turn the car on real quick. All right, turn signal goes on left. Got the right. Now time for the horn. All right, all works. Man, that's pretty awesome. Geez, never actually heard the horn on this car before. Like I mentioned earlier, the previous owner couldn't get the horn to work, so and simply had to just replace that harness that's within the steering column. So, golly. Now, again, like I mentioned earlier, full transparency, I had a hard time getting that harness down the first time, but not realizing all I had to do was just remove the back collar of the steering column with those two little screws. Man, that that was a game changer right there. After that, everything kind of just fell into place. So excited about the new 14-inch steering wheel. Turn signals work now, horn works. Last thing we're really gonna have to do is just, down below that we looked at earlier, all those wires, just want to wrap some Tesa tape over that, clean that up a little bit, and that should be it. Good to go. So yeah, if you guys found this video helpful, hit that thumbs up button, and of course subscribe for more, because we got, geez, we got so many other things to fix in this car. So just to get ready to get inspected, and then of course all the upgrades that we're going to do here in the future. So with that, catch you guys on the next one. See ya.